Is the Denver Broncos offensive line one of their biggest strengths on the team going into the offseason portion ahead of training camp? We discuss this and much more in Headline, the biggest strengths on the roster on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What if I were to tell you that the Denver Broncos offensive line was one of the team's biggest positional strengths going into the season? Would you agree? Would you disagree? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day. Shout out to everybody in Broncos Country. Thank you for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out on an episode as soon as it's made available. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, credentialed Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, my good friend, my sidekick, Sayre Bedinger. He is the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. And as we go through the minicamp portion ahead of the start of veteran minicamp, which is going to begin next week, we're going to highlight some of the positional strengths, weaknesses, and question marks here this week on Locked on Broncos. And we're going to start off with strengths. And Sayre, to be honest with you, there are several positions here you can make the case that are the strengths of this Broncos football team. Let's start off with one of them here. We're going to throw a little bit of a curveball. I know we teased offensive line. That's going to come. But what about wide receiver? Is wide receiver the biggest strength right here for this Broncos team going into the offseason?
I think it's definitely one of them, right? At least when you look at this roster on paper, I think that the wide receiver position has to be considered among the best for the Denver Broncos. I think you got the best combination of talent. I think you got the best combination of potential, veterans and young players. You got guys that have played for Sean Payton before. You've got guys who we think can really play well for Sean Payton. And I think, Cody, there's a good blend here of guys like, Jerry Jeudy, who's the route running, what do you want to call him? Maestro or something like that. I mean, he's one of the best route runners in the NFL, and he's got speed. He's got yak ability. Then you got the two towers, right? Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton. Then you got speed, Marvin Mims coming in. You got the former Saints guys like Marquez Callaway, Lil Jordan Humphrey. I just think you look at this position group. We got to talk about these position groups as though players are going to be healthy, right? Or stay healthy, because you can't necessarily assume, well, you're going to lose this guy or you're going to lose that guy. I think if you look at all the position groups on the Denver Broncos roster and assume everybody's healthy, which we know that's not necessarily going to happen. We hope it happens. But if you assume everybody's healthy, you look at this wide receiver group on paper, I think the Broncos have an opportunity here to really do some damage through the air. And with these guys, they got some good blockers at wide receiver too. I know that's not necessarily what everybody likes to look at, but I look at this group, Cody, as one of the best in the NFL if everybody can play up to their potential, which of course is going to be fun to watch in 2023.
And if everybody can stay healthy, that's another key here for this Broncos receiving group, because I agree with you. I think when you look at it, there is a lot of potential. There's a lot of talent. And I look at the combination, too. You got guys who are sizable, fast, and also physical, which is a great combination to have. For me, I would say in particular, how does Keary Colbert come in as the new wide receiver coach in Sean Payton's offense? And how does he maybe change things or build on what these guys are able to do in the day-to-day, whether it's individual period and whether that's carrying that development over into games in the preseason, so on and so forth, versus like Zach Izzani. Like Zach Izzani stayed on for a while as the Broncos wide receiver coach, but to my understanding as well is I also think that there was an issue in the development of guys maybe on the back end, right? Because as we mentioned, when Cortland went down, when Jerry went down at various points last year, Denver didn't have anybody realistically on the back end that could step up and provide that starting relief, right? And look, it's hard to replace anybody like Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton anyways on the football field. And when those guys went out with an injury, you had to rely on Brandon Johnson. You had to rely on Kendall Hinton, who's always reliable, but is it enough to push the needle forward? I think we're going to see a widespread competition at the position. Obviously, I think it is a strength, wide receiver is, when you look at how many guys are on the roster right now. And heck, there could be even more guys added depending on the circumstances, who makes it from the tryout, who's going to get the invite extended to them. Those are things that we're going to keep our eye on here on Locked on Broncos. But, I mean, you mentioned it too. There are a lot of guys I also feel like that are being looked over a little bit. I feel like Cortland Sutton has been looked over by a lot of people in Broncos country, right? Because last year, we can be open, we can acknowledge it. It was a frustrating year for Cortland. He got off to a really hot start, and then things started to dissipate with the offense, and that wasn't entirely Cortland. It's a combination of, injuries at the receiver position, quarterback play, offensive line play, losing Javonte Williams, getting double teamed there. Cortland didn't have the year that he wanted, but Sayre, you and I have talked about this. We know he's a guy that can turn it on. We know he's a guy who could have 12 catches for over 150 yards in a game. And if you can find a way to have an offensive system that complements not only what he does well, but you're moving these guys around that we saw in the final 2 games of the season last year with Jerry and Cortland, not just keeping them, we're going to keep this guy here, we're going to keep this guy here. Sean Payton himself has even said it. We're going to move these guys all around. To me, that expands your opportunity. Now you factor in Tim Patrick returning off of an ACL injury. I think that, we always have the mindset, let's not put too much in terms of expectations on Tim Patrick because he's going to try to get comfortable being back out there, doing the things that his position requires him to do coming off of an ACL. There's grace here when we're talking about Tim Patrick. KJ Hamler's a guy that has been absolutely just demolished by Broncos fans because of the injuries he has suffered in his career. I can tell you this, personally, he is working his tail off to get back and to be a guy who can contribute. He wants to be an impact playmaker. He can if he's healthy, and I think Broncos Country should extend that grace to let him do that. Let him try to prove that in training camp. And then guess what? You just added Marvin Mims into the mix as well, who has speed. I saw it firsthand on Saturday. Has dynamic speed that can be moved all around. I can't tell you exactly what they were doing with him because that's not for me to permit. I'm not allowed to do that, but I can tell you I'm very, very excited about maybe how Marvin Mims can fit into the mold here for this Broncos offense at the receiver position. And then, hey, look, you got some other guys too. You got Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil, Montrell Washington, but you also have some undrafted guys in Dallas Daniels and Taylor Grimes. I mean, Sayre, right now, Denver's got a lot of dudes at the receiver position. I'm comfortable enough saying right now, if they go into training camp with these guys, I'm excited and I'm comfortable to see how it plays out.
I am too, Cody. I think if you go into the 2023 regular season with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Marvin Mims, KJ Hamler, Marquez Callaway at the wide receiver, that's 6 guys at the wide receiver position, and no disrespect to anybody else on the roster, but if you can take those top 6 guys into camp or into the regular season on your roster, I mean, name me a better wide receiver group that goes 1 through 6 like that. Like that would be insane to be able to say. And of course we understand, like I get where people are coming from with the frustration with KJ Hamler, but like you said, I mean, step into the room with the guy and ask him how, I mean, he doesn't want to be injured. He doesn't want to be dealing with these things. And I don't think you can count him out in terms of the Broncos roster going forward. I know the Marvin Mims selection does contradict that a little bit in terms of maybe the Broncos aren't necessarily planning on much from KJ Hamler, but I think you try to get into the season with Hamler on your team if at all possible, given he's dealing with the pectoral injury right now. We could see, I mean, maybe he starts training camp on the PUP. We don't know if he's physically unable to perform. We'll kind of find out in a couple months here, but if you can go 1 through 6 with those 6 guys into the regular season, like that is to me the best wide receiver group arguably in the NFL on paper. And it all comes down to this. We've seen all of these guys at different times play their best football. Like 2021, Tim Patrick, he was the wide receiver 1 for the Denver Broncos, in my opinion. Cortland Sutton, 2019, makes the Pro Bowl. Jerry Jeudy at the end of the 2022 season looks like a Pro Bowler. When are we going to get to see all these guys put this all together at one time on the field? Hopefully this year, Cody. And hopefully, although Tim Patrick teased maybe the last dance for these guys, right? Hopefully it's not the first and last time we get to see that.
That is the hope here for Broncos Country's sustainability at the wide receiver position. Inside this offense will help Russell Wilson, will help Sean Payton, will help the running backs and this offense find success this upcoming season. There's a lot that needs to be done between now and then in order for that to happen, and we'll have you covered here every step of the way here for Broncos Country. There's been a lot of conversation about the offensive line, Broncos Country, and coming up on today's episode of the show, we're going to talk about the offensive line in general, why we believe it is one of the strengths of the team. You'll get that on today's episode of the show. Let me tell you about our friends over there at Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And if you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, I've got just the thing for you, Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and they taste amazing. They taste so amazing that you won't actually think that they're good for you because they're covered in 100% real chocolate, milk chocolate. And what makes Built Bars so good, I think the fact that they're soft, they're easy to chew, and they have a wide variety of flavors that I certainly love, like churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. They have coconut almond, if you're into coconuts as well. And you can get your hands on a box today by going to your local Walmart, go to the pharmacy department, and you can find a box of 4 Built Bars there locally. Or if you want to go and buy in bulk, go to Sam's Club and you get a box of 13 Built Bars today. Make sure you check it out, or you can always go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your order as well. Built Bar, check it out today.
Could the offensive line be one of the biggest strengths on the Denver Broncos roster here in 2023 after giving up over 60 sacks last season? Cody, I mean, on paper, that's what we're talking about. Biggest roster strengths on paper. We're not necessarily talking about, hey, what have these guys proven on the field up to this point together? Talking about looking on paper, the Broncos made some substantial moves on the offensive line here in 2023. Is the offensive line one of the biggest strengths on this roster going into the 2023 season?
This is a great question. I feel like I'm a little bit in the middle here, Sayre, right? Because we're talking about a drastic difference from a team that gave up 63 sacks, one of the worst offensive lines, one of the worst offenses in football last season, and all of a sudden, hey, they're, maybe perceived by some people like it's much more improved, which I agree. I think the offensive line is drastically improved. And I would say maybe Sean Payton, George Payton, I think they believe that they have probably one of the better offensive line groups right now in the NFL based on the moves that they've made. Like, let's be honest here. They went out and they got Mike McGlinchey, who we can make the argument right now, at least on paper, Sayre, is probably the best right tackle prospect on paper that they've added to the team in free agency in the last, 6-7 years, maybe even longer than that. Like, that has been the position that we've all been saying, like, does Denver have a guy there? Is this the option? Is this the long-term option at right tackle for Denver? Because the largest question for a while after Ryan Clady was left tackle. Well, here we are, and hopefully Mike McGlinchey is the guy there. Then they go in and they replace Dalton Reisner at left guard with a guy in Ben Powers who is perceived by many, and a lot of people said during the NFL free agency, was the perceived best interior offensive lineman in the NFL free agency class this year. You bring him in considering his ability to pass protect on the inside, where a lot of pressure came last year. Not only that, just his ability to help set up the run game. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. These are massive upgrades. To me, then you have Quinn Miners, who is viewed very, very highly by various league executives. And not only that, just even guys in Denver, George Payton, Sean Payton, view him very, very highly. And then there's Garrett Bowles coming off of the massive injury from last year. I mean, his career arc is very interesting, right? First round pick, high expectations, perceived by many fans to be a bust. And then he turns his play around. He develops a little bit more under Mike Munchak, and then he suffers the injury last year. So can Garrett Bowles return to the form that, led to him being a first-team All-Pro tackle and also a Pro Bowl tackle? If Denver gets that version of Bowles, I would say yes. But, we talk about question marks, right? And obviously, Broncos Country, if you are an everydayer out there listening to this podcast, tomorrow's episode of the show, we're going to talk about question marks that are here on this Broncos offense. We're going to talk about weaknesses as well. You'll get that this week on Locked On Broncos. Lloyd Cushenberry there at center. I mean, the expectation is that, hey, you have good guard play around him. Maybe he can emerge and maybe he can take the next step forward. I mean, there's so many variables here, Sayre, that I feel like have to be talked about as it pertains to if the Broncos are going to have one of the top offensive lines in the NFL this season. But I do think that we can confidently say right now that the offensive line right now on paper for Denver, it does look like one of the team's bigger strengths.
Right, and they're getting some national recognition, right? Mike Clay, who analyzed all position groups around the league for every team, ranked the Broncos 9th overall in terms of their offensive line. And I think that speaks to the fact that there's not many teams out there that have average to above average starters at every offensive line position, right? The Philadelphia Eagles kind of the gold standard right now in terms of the offensive line. You got 2 elite bookend tackles, of course, out there. You've got great interior offensive line play. You've got depth. They've kind of got the whole 9 yards in Philadelphia when it comes to building an offensive line. But for the Denver Broncos, what you have is you have at least 4 out of the 5 positions on paper, talking about everybody being healthy, right? You've got 4 out of the 5 positions with average to above average play at this point, and maybe maybe better with Ben Powers, maybe better with Quinn Miners than just average to above average. And I think that that's something that's, it plays in the NFL today. If you have average to above average starters on the offensive line and you have good coaching, you got a good scheme, you got a good play caller. That offensive line, which, people may say the players are average to above average. Well, now you got a good scheme and play caller and all these different things, and that offensive line all of a sudden looks way better. So those factors all at play here, I think, make a huge difference for the Denver Broncos, with Lloyd Cushenberry really being that one question mark on the O-line. If everybody's healthy, even if everyone's healthy, I think he's the one question mark to say, can he be effective in the starting role over the long term? We saw some progression for him in his second NFL season, but then kind of maybe a little regression in 2021 and 2022, of course, when he got injured. Cody, I'm excited to see what this O-line can do, because I do view it as a bit more of a strength now, given the moves that were made in free agency.
I think there's also another variable we should probably throw out there when we're talking about this, and that's new offensive line coach Zach Strief, who's coming over after being assistant guy with the Saints last year. He's now the man in charge of the offensive line, and so he's got a very, very crucial job that Sean Payton is entrusting to him. Like, hey, the offensive line, you know exactly what I like. You know exactly how our offensive scheme works. Get these guys up to speed as fast as possible, and also be instrumental in the development of some of the younger guys on the practice squad, some of the depth guys that you have there. I don't think that there will be an issue in terms of these veteran guys and the projected starters coming in, knowing the scheme, learning it, and figuring everything out. I think that kind of speaks for itself here. But for me, it is a question, right? Because, he played from 2006 to 2017. It's a little bit different, right? It's not about what you know as a coach. It's what can you teach to these guys. To me, that's a curious storyline that I think that we'll have here for training camp when it approaches here toward the end of July. But another thing as well is, will he make a difference? Can he be a difference maker? Because we've seen how important coaching is. Like, Butch Barry was a disaster for the Broncos offensive line last season. Not only with the debauchery that was going on with Nathaniel Hackett in the offense, but Butch Barry just simply wasn't a very good coach for the Broncos and didn't coach guys up. Now you look at what Mike Munchak was able to do with these guys. Munchak was such a crucial part of the offensive line several years ago. And obviously, you missed maybe having a veteran presence like that, because he's one of the best guys out there. So there are some questions when it pertains to, can Zach Strief get the job done? And I think if Sean Payton didn't feel that he could, he wouldn't be on the coaching staff. So there's a trust factor. There's that element that goes into that. But for me, I do think that you look at the monetary value in which Denver has invested in the offensive line this upcoming season. I mean, Sayre, it is fair to say that, hey, they do believe that they are much more improved. They're exactly where they need to be, or else we would have seen them maybe trade up in round 2 to get an offensive lineman in the draft, or maybe in round 3 would have used one of those picks on an offensive lineman. It seems like they feel very confident in that position, which begs us to ask the question here to Broncos Country. How do you feel about the Broncos offensive line? Do you now view it as one of the biggest strengths of the team going into the season? If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments down below. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting provider, make sure you tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. What is the other strength for the Broncos in terms of this team going into training camp? Well, we're going to give you a little bit of a teaser. It's a hard-hitting position that has versatility to make plays through the air. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, let me tell you about what we have going on here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We have some exciting news as we have partnered with SiriusXM. You listen to Locked On Broncos every single day on your favorite podcasting providers here, and you also watch us on YouTube. But if you have the SiriusXM app, if you listen to your stuff that you do in your day-to-day on SiriusXM, you can now listen to Locked On Broncos, which is available right now inside the SiriusXM app. Download it today. If you want to listen to it every single day on the go, you can now do that with SiriusXM. What is the other position right now for the Denver Broncos? It is one of their biggest strengths heading into the season. We take a look at that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. We just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. We're grateful for you taking time out of your day to listen or to watch and to interact with us on social media and on YouTube. It means the world, Broncos Country. Shout out to all the everydayers like Dennis, like Bill, and others. If you're an everyday listener, let us know down below in the YouTube comments. This may be an interesting one in the eyes of many in Broncos Country, but you and I were both talking about what are the biggest strengths here for this roster going into the season. We've highlighted wide receiver. We've talked about offensive line. Let's talk about the safety position as well. This is kind of where we were in agreement because of what the Broncos have done at the position, who they have there as well. I think it is fair to say that safety right now is a strength of this team. And look, it's headlined by Justin Simmons and the return of the Jack, Kareem Jackson. He is back as well. And let's talk about maybe why we feel like safety is, in fact, a strength of this team going into the season.
Yeah, I feel like for starters, you have two really good veterans, Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson. Of course, those guys are proven, tried and true. They're durable. They are productive. They are good leaders on and off the field. I think that all speaks for itself, right? There's not much we can say about Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson at this point that hasn't already been said, but those guys are two of the best at their craft in the league. And it's great to see them back together again for, what is this now? Their fifth season together, right? 2019, 2021. Yeah, fifth season together. So, I mean, that's really great. I love the continuity. And now you got young guys in the mix, right? Caden Stearns, you expect him to take a much bigger role in 2023 as far as maybe potentially being that starter along with Justin Simmons, with Kareem Jackson maybe taking a bit of a reduced role. I don't mind that idea at all. And I think the depth at this position, like some of the positions that we talk about, like offensive line, you can't necessarily say, well, that position's a strength of this roster because it's so deep. But you could say maybe the Broncos have one of the better starting fives in the NFL. Wide receiver, very deep. Safety, I think you have a great combination of proven starters and excellent depth at the position. So all three of these position groups are strengths, I think, for different reasons, which is fascinating because we have seen productivity from Simmons, Jackson, Caden Stearns when he gets the chance to play. And then last year, PJ Locke stepping up and doing some work as far as being a productive defensive player, not just special teamer. So I think you've got a great combination at safety, guys that have really contributed as starters, guys that are established, maybe star players in the NFL, if you want to call it that, which I would, as at least as far as Justin Simmons is concerned. And then I would say you have really good depth. You've got proven depth. You've got young guys that can contribute at the position. I think safety it might be one of those positions that you can go to sleep at night knowing that, hey, no matter what happens over the course of the season for the Denver Broncos, this position group is probably going to be really good.
Remember the days just a few years ago where you and I we'd have conversations like, man, you know what? Denver's one injury away from being in dire straits at the safety position. Like, we were worried about, okay, if this guy goes down or if this guy goes down, what are you going to do? Who are you going to have that can step up and play well? And I think for the first time, really, in a situation where that did happen, where an injury impacted a key player, like obviously Justin Simmons after week 1, we saw Caden Stearns step up into that role and play well. I mean, he was magnificent before having the hip injury as well. He's making tremendous progress this offseason, should be ready to go for training camp. But, you know, you have confidence, like if Kareem or Justin were to ever miss any time, Caden Stearns has proven that he can step up, right? And look, Caden Stearns may very well be the starter next to Justin Simmons. I firmly believe that is the expectation, considering some of the rumblings that Kareem was told that he would have a little bit of a reduced role this upcoming season. But then it's like, okay, hey, if let's say Caden is the starter, and let's say Caden were to suffer any type of injury, okay, well, Kareem Jackson, a proven guy who's had valuable starting experience, will just step back into the starting role alongside Justin Simmons, where those two together over the course of their career, they have kind of been a top safety duo in the NFL. Last season, Justin Simmons was tied for the league lead in interceptions despite missing 5 games. And he also, this is the stat that blows my mind here about it as well, despite the fact that he missed 5 total games for the Broncos last season, had the interception output that he did, he also forced a league-high 10 turnovers by a defensive player. Nobody else in the NFL did that. Justin Simmons led the league in that category. To me, that's special. There are a lot of people out there, there are a lot of people that don't think that Justin Simmons is a good safety, which to me, it's like, what the hell are you watching? Sayre, I don't understand where people believe this narrative or say the things that he's overrated, because clearly he has proven he's not that in terms of taking the football away, being an impact playmaker, heck, not to mention the peer recognition that he gets as well across the NFL. There's some really damn good safeties in the league, but when we talk about overall versatility to be able to play against the run and cover the pass, Justin Simmons is one of the top guys in the NFL. And if you think otherwise, I don't know. You might need to go get your eyes checked by a doctor there for the people that don't believe that, because he has clearly proven it year in and year out for the team. And not to mention the Broncos rewarded him with a contract extension because they also believe the same thing. And then you factor in guys like PJ Locke, as you mentioned, who has also proven to step up and be a reliable player on defense if need be. As you mentioned, not only just a special teams guy. And then now you're going to factor in Delarian Turner-Yale going into his second season in the NFL. You want to see him take that next step forward, that necessary growth, and maybe even contribute even more on special teams. J.L. Skinner, I can tell you this, Sayre, going in the locker room on Saturday and getting to talk to him, he's tall. He is tall. I mean, it is different to see a safety that big up close and in person. Look, me, I'm 5'10". Look, I'm not 6'4". I'm around 5'10", 5'9". Looking at him and just seeing how big he is, it gets me excited as a former defensive backs coach and as a guy who's played DB, like, hey, what can this guy do for you? Because he could really be kind of a Swiss Army knife if you put him in the right role on defense. But then again, he's a rookie. We need to temper expectations, let him go out there in training camp and prove his worth. But I'd say from quality starters to depth, I think Denver, this is probably one of their biggest strengths on the team right now is the safety position.
Absolutely, it is, and it's got a group of diverse skill sets too, right? You've got Justin Simmons, who's, like you said,
skills that they've acquired over years to deal with people like
100%
running backs.
I love that, Cody. Yeah, skills they've acquired. Yes, the Broncos have a number of guys that are gonna, hey, you got the ball in your hand, they're gonna come and find you no matter what. I don't know who you are, but I love that you bring Kareem Jackson back for a role very specifically to come and maybe be that attacker at the position. And then you've got Caden Stearns with his big time range and ball skills and ability to impact throwing lanes, right? He can get from A to B. He can get there rather quickly. I think he was one of the closest to the 10 out of 10 on the RAS scale that we have in that defensive backfield in terms of his explosiveness and speed. So you've got guys with speed, you've got guys with size, you've got guys with range, you've got guys who can attack the line of scrimmage, you've got guys who can play back in the two high looks, you got guys who can play special teams. You got all sorts of different things at the safety position. It's a true melding pot, and I love this group for the Broncos going forward. And I think, especially when you talk about it being led by Justin Simmons, this is a group that, like I said, you can sleep at night knowing that you have players that they can just come out and make plays. You lose Justin Simmons last year to an injury. Caden Stearns comes in and has a few really great games. You lose Caden Stearns to an injury. You've got guys that can back him up in terms of that depth there. Or you've got guys like K-Jack and Simmons who, man, when they're healthy, they don't even need to come off the field. So it's a great group. I think the Broncos have, I would say maybe, dare I say, Cody, an embarrassment of riches at safety going into this season.
It's not a bad thing to have because that safety position is becoming one of the more important positions in football as the league continues to transition and evolve, especially with the offenses that you see. You have to have guys that can maybe play on the back end, play up, not just be designated as this is your role. You're a middle of the field guy. You're a box guy. You got to be able to do both now in today's game of the NFL. And Broncos Country, we want to hear from you. Do you believe that the Broncos safety room is one of their biggest strengths from a positional standpoint on this team going into the season? Let us know on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos, or if you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comments down below and interact with other members of Broncos Country. But for all you everyday listeners of the show, tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos, here's what you can expect. We're going to talk about the biggest weaknesses that we believe the Broncos have on this team position-wise going into the season. You'll get that and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.